Look at me when I'm talking to you. You've heard that sentence before. Maybe from a parent who mistook your downward gaze for disrespect. Maybe from a teacher who assumed you weren't listening because your eyes were somewhere else. Maybe from a partner during an argument who needed your eyes to believe your words. And you gave them, but it cost you something you couldn't name. Like handing someone a piece of yourself that you hadn't agreed to share. You looked, you held it, and somewhere behind your eyes, something tightened, something pulled back, and you waited for the moment you were allowed to look away again, the way a person underwater waits for the surface. You've been told this is shyness. You've been told it's low confidence. You've been told it's a social skill you need to develop, like firm handshakes and small talk, and remembering people's names at parties. And you've probably tried. Held eye contact for 3 seconds, 4, 5, counting internally, like someone diffusing a device, performing a behavior that the entire world seems to do naturally, while your nervous system quietly screams that this is too much, too close, too fast, too something that you've never had the right word for. Here's the word, and it's not the one you've been given. What you're experiencing isn't a social deficit. It's a sensory event, and once you understand the difference, every awkward conversation you've ever had, every job interview where you forced yourself to stare at someone's forehead because their actual eyes were unbearable, every moment you looked away and felt like you failed at something fundamentally human, all of it is going to reframe in a way that might genuinely change how you see yourself. Not metaphorically, literally. How you see. If this is already landing somewhere specific for you, hit the like button. Not for me, for the algorithm. Because there are people scrolling right now who've spent their entire lives thinking something is wrong with their eyes, when the real story is something far more interesting and far less broken. Most people experience eye contact as a social tool, a way to signal attention, build trust, establish dominance, or communicate interest. It's functional. It's transactional. They look at you, you look at them, information moves back and forth, and the whole thing feels about as emotionally loaded as a handshake. Comfortable, expected, forgettable. But for a specific subset of people, and you already know if you're one of them, eye contact is not a transaction. It's a transmission. Something is being sent, and something is being received, and the bandwidth is so high that your internal system starts throwing up warnings, like a computer trying to download the entire internet through a single wire. The issue was never that you can't make eye contact. The issue is that when you do, you receive more information than you know what to do with. And that experience, which looks from the outside like avoidance, is actually the opposite. It's overwhelm from too much connection, not too little. Gwyneth Doherty-Snedden, a psychologist at the University of Stirling, studied gaze aversion in children and adults, and found something that most people's assumptions about eye contact completely fail to account for. When people look away during conversation, particularly during moments that require deeper cognitive processing, they're not disengaging. They're doing the opposite. They're managing cognitive load. The brain is receiving so much information through the eyes, facial micro-expressions, emotional states, the constant unconscious calculation of what the other person might be thinking, that looking away is the nervous system's way of turning down one input channel so the thinking channel doesn't crash. Her research showed that children who looked away while solving problems actually performed better than children who maintained eye contact. The looking away wasn't a failure of attention, it was a strategy for preserving it, and that's just the cognitive layer. There's something underneath it that goes much deeper. Nushin Hajikani, a neuroscientist working across Harvard and MIT, has published research on what happens inside the brain during direct gaze. And what she found is that eye contact doesn't just activate the social processing centers you'd expect. It lights up the amygdala, the fear center, the part of the brain that evaluates threat, not in everyone to the same degree, but measurably, consistently, and particularly in individuals with heightened sensory sensitivity. For these people, direct eye contact doesn't just carry social information. It carries physiological arousal that the body interprets somewhere on the spectrum between intimacy and intrusion, often both simultaneously, and the nervous system doesn't always know the difference between being seen and being exposed. Read that again. Being seen and being exposed. Those two experiences live inches apart inside the brain, and for most people, the boundary between them is thick and well insulated, and they barely notice it's there. For you, that boundary is thin, maybe translucent, maybe missing in places. And when someone looks you directly in the eyes and holds it, they're not just looking at you. They're in, past the social mask, past the curated expression, past the version of you that you've learned to present. They're at the actual you, the one you didn't invite them to meet yet, and your body responds the way any body responds when someone enters a space they weren't given permission to enter. It pulls away, looks down, looks to the side, finds the corner of the table infinitely fascinating for about 3 seconds until the pressure passes. That's not weakness. That's a boundary your body is drawing in real time, because your conscious mind is too polite to draw it with words. Now, this is where it gets genuinely interesting, and I think this is the part most people have never had explained to them clearly. Arthur Aaron, a psychologist at Stony Brook University, conducted an experiment in 1997 that became one of the most referenced studies in relationship psychology. He had strangers sit across from each other, answer 36 increasingly personal questions, and then, at the end, look into each other's eyes for 4 minutes without speaking. The result? Participants reported dramatic increases in feelings of closeness and emotional intimacy. 2 of them eventually married. The study became famous as the experiment that could make strangers fall in love. But here's the piece everyone overlooks when they cite that study. The intimacy wasn't incidental to the eye contact. The eye contact was the mechanism. 4 minutes of unbroken mutual gaze created a level of emotional exposure that was, for most participants, unlike anything they'd experienced with people they'd known for years. And it worked, because the eyes aren't just input devices, they're output devices. They reveal, they betray. They communicate things the mouth would never agree to say. And sustained eye contact is, neurologically and experientially, one of the most intimate acts 2 humans can share without physical touch. So when your nervous system flinches at sustained eye contact with a coworker at a Monday morning meeting, it's not malfunctioning. It's responding proportionally to the actual level of exposure happening. You're not broken for finding it overwhelming. You're accurately registering the intensity of something that everyone else has simply learned to not notice anymore. The way people who live next to a highway stop hearing the traffic. The noise didn't stop. Their ears just quit reporting it. Yours didn't. I want to know something. Tell me in the comments. When someone holds eye contact with you, where does the discomfort live in your body? Is it your chest, your stomach, behind your eyes? Because the location tells a story that most people have never been asked to read about themselves. And this connects to something larger than just eye contact. Elaine Aron, a research psychologist who has spent decades studying sensory processing sensitivity, estimates that roughly 15 to 20% of the human population carries a neurological trait she calls high sensitivity, not emotional fragility, neurological sensitivity. Their brains process sensory input more deeply, more thoroughly, and more persistently than the other 80%. They notice subtleties that others miss. They process experiences longer, and they become overstimulated faster, not because they're weak, but because their hardware is running a more detailed analysis of the same information everyone else is handling on autopilot. Eye contact, for a highly sensitive nervous system, is not one input. It's dozens of inputs arriving simultaneously. The color shifts in the iris, the microtensions around the mouth that indicate whether the smile is real, the dilation of the pupil, the speed of the blink, the almost imperceptible shift in expression that tells you someone is about to lie before they've even opened their mouth. You're reading all of it. You've always been reading all of it. And nobody ever told you that the reason eye contact is exhausting isn't because you're doing it wrong, it's because you're doing it at a resolution that most people's nervous systems don't even have access to. And here's the part that actually needs to be said, because this is where the psychology gets personal in a way that most content about eye contact carefully avoids. A lot of people who struggle with eye contact didn't just arrive that way neurologically. Something happened. Not always something dramatic. Sometimes it was subtle. A parent whose gaze carried judgment more often than warmth. A childhood where being seen too clearly meant being corrected. An environment where the safest thing to do was stay slightly invisible, slightly out of focus, because what happened when someone really looked at you wasn't connection, it was evaluation. And your nervous system learned, long before you had the language for it, that being looked at directly was not a neutral experience. It carried weather, sometimes warm, often not, and the adaptation was elegant in its simplicity. Don't hold the gaze. Don't let them all the way in. Control the exposure. That adaptation made sense then. It kept you safe. But now you're an adult and someone who loves you is asking you to look at them during a conversation that matters, and your body is running a 20-year-old protection protocol against a threat that no longer exists, and you can feel the absurdity of it and the power of it at the same time, and you look away anyway because the software runs faster than the understanding. The people in your life who say, "Just look at me," don't mean any harm. They're asking for connection in the language they understand. But they don't know that for you, looking at someone isn't a casual act, it's an opening, a doorway. And every doorway is also an entry point, and you've spent a long time being very careful about who gets to walk through. So no, you don't need to practice holding eye contact for longer intervals like you're training a muscle at the gym. You don't need exposure therapy disguised as networking advice. You don't need to perform a neurotypical behavior that was never designed for how your brain actually works. What you might need, and this is something no amount of confidence tips or body language hacks will ever replace, is to understand that looking away was never the problem. The problem was, every person who made you feel like looking away meant you were less confident, less capable, less present, less human. You were always present. You were present at a frequency that the room couldn't hear. The next time someone holds your gaze and the instinct to look away rises like heat behind your eyes, let it. Look away. Find the corner of the table. Take the breath. And know that what just happened wasn't a failure of social performance. It was your nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do. Protecting the interior, regulating the input, choosing, in a fraction of a second, that your inner world matters more than someone else's expectation of where your eyes should be. The people who are worth staying in your life will learn to read you without requiring your direct gaze as proof of attendance. And the ones who can't handle your averted eyes probably couldn't have handled what they'd find if you ever actually let them look all the way in. Your eyes aren't avoiding. They're selecting. There's a difference that the entire world forgot to teach you, and now you know it. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next one goes deeper into a pattern that connects directly to this, and if this video made sense to you, that one is going to hit different. I'll see you there.